Still talking about filtration. We have a little bit of a slow progress. I apologize, but so to regulate the rate of filtration is extremely important. And the bottom line is that that's because how fast stuff forms in this cup that we call the capsule will then affect how quickly stuff moves through the whole tube. So if you form this fluid that we call filtrate really, really quickly, then a whole lot of volume builds up, and that means that there's a really quick push. All right? If this filtrate forms slowly, it percolates slowly, stuff leaves the blood and moves through the filtration slits into the cup, then that slows down the movement through the tubule. Okay, so why is the speed at which filtrate moves through the renal tubule important? Well, because that determines what will be reabsorbed. So if you move the filtrate too quickly, which is going to happen if you form the filtrate too fast, glomerular filtration rate, then you're not going to be able to reclaim some valuable molecules. If it goes too slow, well, then you might start reabsorbing things that you really didn't need or want as well. So keeping this filtration rate constant, and again we call this the GFR, glomerular filtration rate, is extremely important. Right? So to do that, we have some monitors built in. Yes, sensors. Okay? These sensors are collectively called the juxta next to the glomerulus apparatus. Right? So here's a cartoon of this. Here's some real examples. And I've actually seen these on some of the slides, so just to let you know. So again, this is a cut through a biopsy through the kidneys where these tubes are moving all over the place, but are all separate. So filtrate is forming here, This is where the glomerulus is and the podocytes are. This is this thing here. And this space here is this space here. All right. So we're going to push fluid into a proximal convoluted tubule. And so it makes it look like this is not connected to this, but it is. And we know that. We just didn't, in this plane, we didn't cut it. All right. So there's some brush border here that they show you. That's how you know it's a proximal convoluted tubule. It has microvilli. And then we have this distal convoluted tubule that also comes very close when we look at the way all these tubes are coiled up and moving through this kidney. So here in this little cartoon, and you have this on one of your models, here is the distal convoluted tubule, right here. And the distal convoluted tubule has these cells that we collectively call macula densa. And surrounding the afferent arteriole, so here's coming in to the glomerulus, are some two cells that we call the juxtaglomerular cells. Right? So they're kind of showing you these. They surround this afferent arteriole. So they monitor the composition and the flow, as I've mentioned already. So, and they do this through sodium. So some of these sensors are sensitive to a solute, and some of them are sensitive to a stretch, right? How quickly you're flowing. So macula densa over here in the distal convoluted will release paracrine substances, right? So they're going to be dumped, and they'll influence this afferent arteriole. And they do this when the osmolarity concentration, right, of the filtrate is not balanced. This release affects the juxtaglomerular cells, which then affect the arteriole. So this tells this, which tells this. And by monitoring the filtrate and keeping it constant, we can, manage the glomerular filtration rate, right? So what else do macula densa do? All right, so it says here the macula densa sends low fluid flow. So again, the flow rate is too slow. Your filtrate is not forming fast enough, or you have low sodium concentration, and that's because, again, if you slow down the flow, your cells would reabsorb too much sodium. So by the time it got to the distal convoluted tubule, you'd be low. All right. When this occurs, they then tell the juxtaglomerular cells, right? So we're passing the information chemically, and the juxtaglomerular cells make this compound called renin, and they dump it in the blood. So renin's an enzyme. All right. So renin is released, and its substrate is angiotensin 1. It turns out the liver is making this compound called angiotensinogen, right? There's the OG that's in the blood. And so when it's around, it converts angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1. All right, still flowing through the body and in the blood, there's an angiotensin converting enzyme, or ACE, that's made by the tissue cells in the lungs. And this is also an enzyme, right? We said that converting enzyme. So its substrate is angiotensin 1, and when this is around, it converts it to angiotensin 2. Well, it turns out angiotensin 2 is a widespread, or all over the body, systemic vasoconstrictor. So it's going to cause a bunch of arterioles to begin to decrease in size. That's going to stimulate a profound increase in blood pressure. So we want to think about when this would have happened. And this would have happened if blood pressure was low, right? Low fluid flow. Okay? So stimulates vasoconstriction, and then stimulates the adrenal cortex to make aldosterone. So why aldosterone? Well, aldosterone will turn around as a hormone and tell the kidneys to reabsorb, right, more sodium, and that's what you're seeing here, right, that the collecting ducts are bringing back more sodium. And when sodium is being returned to the blood, water will come with it, all right? And so we're going to see, right, sodium and water coming back to the blood, which means blood volume is going to increase. Okay? And then we also have antidiuretic hormone that will be made because of all of this. And that's why it was called the RAA, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone, and then, of course, antidiuretic. So RAAAA, right? And antidiuretic hormone causes these channels, water channels, to be put into the collecting ducts, and then the collecting ducts increase their return of water. So really, ADH is influencing over here, right? So when flow and pressure decrease, this is a process of increasing them or stabilizing them, really. All right? All right, so what else? We said we've got our filtration covered. What about reabsorption and secretion? All right, so we're talking about controlling rate of formation here because that determines, right, the rate of formation here determines what happens here. So if we, again, filtrate too fast, then the fluids move too quickly through the entire tubule, and we get stuff in the pee that we didn't want to leave the body. If it goes too slow, well, then we have a problem that we are going to reabsorb more than we needed, and we have to speed it up in that circumstance. So, all right, slow flow, fast flow, not good, right? We want a fairly constant filtration rate, and that allows us to do a fairly good job of reabsorption and secretion. All right, so the renal tubule, again, we said that's the proximal convoluted tubule, the tube coming off the capsule. The descending limb of the nephronic loop, the ascending limb of the nephronic loop, the distal convoluted tubule, right, and then into the collecting ducts. I say the proximal convoluted tubule is simple cuboidal. That's why we use this name P1 to teach you that tissue, right? Has microvilli, that's what we talk about the brush border, and probably 70% of your reabsorption occurs here, so most of it's going to occur here. All right, the loops are just a continuation, and they become simple cuboidal and simple squamous. So when we see these thinner areas or segments, that's simple squamous cells there. And then the distal convoluted tubule, coming back up, is again simple cuboidal. So it does secretion and some reabsorption, mostly sodium and water. So we want to go through and try to figure that out. The collecting ducts are not part of the nephron, but they still do affect urine. They are most sensitive to antidiuretic hormone. So I say here, when antidiuretic hormone is produced, the cells that make up this tube here will make more water channels. I'll show you this here. And that means that the water that's in here inside the tube can leave this way and not have to go this way. So it leaves this way by reabsorption. So when there is no ADH, then there are no water channels. and the water in the fluid or filtrate just goes on to stay in the urine. So it's really, that's the job of ADH, is determine whether water will stay or go. All right, and we'll move through the Kahoot here. So how do we form urine? Well, we look at, again, collectively the nephrons, which there's maybe 10 nephrons that drain into one collecting duct. And these guys collect, nephrons and collecting ducts control the composition of the plasma. They allow fluids and useful molecules to come back. They get rid of, right? So we're making choices here. We get rid of the waste and excess, and that stuff will become urine. So again, the simple arithmetic, I can't even talk today, right? The simple relationship between what we've been talking about here is that you dumped a whole lot of stuff from the plasma into the renal corpuscle. The job of the renal tubule then is to select, right, what comes back, and so that will be subtracted from what. So if it's what's being reabsorbed is no longer part of the filtrate. What's added to the filtrate, though, is stuff that gets secreted. So we have to look at that as well. And so the relationship of these is that urine is a result of all this filtration minus, right, reabsorption, which is, we typically reabsorb about 99%, and then any secretions that move stuff from the blood to the tube, all right? There's a lovely table on page 1224 to look at the symptoms of kidney failure, and again, think about why these things present in people. All right, so your glomerular filtration rate, which I talked about already a little bit when I talked about the Juxtaglomerular apparatus, works like this. It's the amount of filtrate, milliliters, formed by both kidneys per minute. That's what a rate is. It's a volume or distance over time. So here it's volume over time. At rest, we said there's about 5 liters in your cardiac output, so about 1 liter, because we said about 25%, that's 20%, but about 1 liter enters the kidneys for filtration, and of this one, 105 to 125 milliliters is filtered per minute. This is important. You have to keep up. And so the kidneys can't afford to go less than this or go higher than this, because that will affect the composition of the blood. I said 99% of this will be returned to the blood. The rest is urine. So of this 1 liter, right, we're only going to get rid of 10 milliliters, right, of fluid. So, all right, so this is a quota. You have to maintain this to keep the composition of the blood correct, right? And again, you're not going to do the calculations for me, but on table 25.4, that gives you some of the calculations that you have to think about clinically. All right, so how do we get filtration? Well, it's pressure driven, right? It's the same thing that happened between the capillary beds of the body, other capillary beds within the body, and the cells of the body, right? When we talked about that in the cardiovascular chapter. So there's hydrostatic pressure and there's osmotic pressure. And we're not adding any other pressures, right? It's just those are the basic groups. So your blood hydrostatic pressure here is a little higher because we said this capillary is between 2 arterioles, and this arteriole is larger than that arteriole, so this means slightly higher blood pressure. But that's good because it helps us push, right? So there is osmotic pressure in the blood itself that's always there, and this is really due to the large proteins like albumins and fibrinogens and so forth. And these proteins are too big to leave, so they stay in here and they have osmotic pressure constant throughout the entire tube. Then there is also something else to reckon here, and that's capsular hydrostatic. So we're moving fluid from here to here, but there's already fluid in here, a little bit, not much, because again, it should move fairly quickly into the renal tubule. So there's a little bit of pressure in here. So these arrows are showing you what happens. So these two, osmotic pressure and capsular hydrostatic pressure, are resisting. They're preventing the movement of fluid from blood to capsule, and blood hydrostatic pressure is pushing it. Okay? So this is, you have to balance these, as we talked about before. So the amount of fluid in the capsule and the amount of stuff in the blood is what opposes. It's the hydrostatic pressure that pushes it. All right? In the end, net filtration pressure is really who wins, and how does this work, right? And we will look at this in the next video.